Wait, before you click away, I need to tell you about the time I watched a funeral that genuinely made me question everything I thought I knew about obsession, legacy, and what it means to be a king, not a man, but a horse. I'm talking about a phenomenon so massive, so completely out of this world, that when his time finally came, America didn't just mourn. They buried him like a head of state, with a bronze casket and a procession that brought a city to a standstill. Was this the peak of human devotion, or a grotesque display of how fame can transcend species? That is the question I've wrestled with ever since I stumbled upon the unbelievable true story of Man o' War. Tell me, if you had witnessed this legend unfold in real time, would you have been swept up in the hysteria, or stood on the outside shaking your head? I need you to keep that thought in your mind as I take you back to the very beginning, to a time when a legend was literally being born. The year was 1917, and the world was in the throes of a massive, brutal war. But in the peaceful bluegrass country of Kentucky, a colt was foaled at nursery stud, and from the moment he tried to find his footing, there was something undeniably different about him. He was the son of Fairplay and Mahuba, a pedigree of champions, but he had a presence that dwarfed his lineage. I've heard countless stories of the great horses, but Man o' War was built like a sculpture of pure power, 16.2 hands high, with a barrel chest, a long sweeping stride, and a coat the color of burnished mahogany, hence the nickname they'd eventually give him, Big Red. But it wasn't just his looks, it was his fire. He was temperamental, almost violently so. The early days were a chaotic ballet of handlers trying to contain a creature who seemed to think he was above all of them, a force of nature in a horse's body. He was so headstrong, so fast in his movements that his groom, an incredible man named Will Harboot, later joked that trying to get him to cooperate was like trying to hold a tiger by the tail. And that brings us to the man who would give him his name, the owner who unwittingly set this whole insane legend in motion, Samuel D. Riddle. Riddle was an old-school gentleman from Pennsylvania, a man of wealth and racing passion, and he bought Big Red as a yearling in 1918 for a paltry $5,000. $5,000! That price in hindsight is the most darkly comedic part of the whole story. It's like buying the Mona Lisa for the cost of the canvas. The war, they say, kept the price down, as many wealthy Europeans and Americans were focused on more somber matters, but Riddle knew he had a diamond, though he couldn't have possibly foreseen he had acquired a mythical beast. Riddle put Man o' War under the training of Louis Fustel, and when his 2-year-old season began in 1919, the world was utterly unprepared for the explosion of speed and power that Big Red delivered. His first race, a $5,000 maiden event at Belmont Park, was a blink-and-you-miss-it spectacle. He won by 6 lengths just jogging the last furlong, and the buzz started immediately. It was a dizzying string of victories that followed, race after race, a testament not just to speed but to an almost contemptuous dominance. He didn't just win, he obliterated his opponents. His margins of victory were becoming astronomical. 6 lengths, 8 lengths, 10 lengths, and he was consistently setting new track records. It was clear very quickly that he wasn't racing the other horses. He was racing the clock, the ghosts of past champions and his own destiny. The crowd swelled at every track he ran at, people showing up hours early just for a glimpse of him in the paddock. He wasn't a racehorse anymore. He was a celebrity, a national distraction from the difficult post-war period. His one and only loss, that single blemish on a perfect record, came in the Sanford Memorial Stakes at Saratoga. It's a story that has become a legend in its own right because of course it wasn't his fault. They say the starter, a man named George Cassidy, didn't wait for Man o' War to get properly positioned at the post, and Big Red was essentially caught standing flat-footed. He ended up starting a whopping 50-60 feet behind the rest of the field, a physical impossibility for a flat race. Despite that crushing disadvantage, he nearly won, losing by only half a length to a horse named Upset, a name that became synonymous with the single biggest fluke in racing history. The defeat was so universally blamed on the poor starting conditions that it somehow enhanced his mystique. It cemented the belief that he was unbeatable, and if he did lose, it was only because of an act of God or incompetence. When Man o' War turned 3 in 1920, the legend entered a whole new dimension. Riddle made the controversial decision to skip the Kentucky Derby, a move that still infuriates purists today, but one that Riddle defended by saying the Derby came too early in the season, and he didn't want to risk his horse in a crowded, rough field. Instead, he started with the Preakness Stakes and the destruction continued. He won the Preakness by 1.5 lengths, and then the Belmont Stakes, the third jewel of the Triple Crown, by an unbelievable 20 lengths, setting a new world record for the mile and 3/8.
20 lengths!
Imagine the feeling of being one of the jockeys behind him, watching his tail disappear into the horizon. It must have been soul-crushing. His 2-year reign was a statistical absurdity. In his entire career, he started 21 times, and he won 20 of those races. He set 3 world records, 2 American records, and 3 track records. His average margin of victory in his wins was over 10 lengths. In the Lawrence Realization Stakes, he won by an officially recorded 100 lengths against a lone challenger, breaking another world record in the process. The track announcer simply gave up trying to describe the gap, and the official chart simply said, "Won by 100 lengths." I'm not making this up. 100 lengths! It was no longer a sport. It was an exhibition of power, a one-horse demolition derby. Spectators weren't betting on if he would win, but on how much he would win by, or if he would manage to break yet another record. They carried him on their shoulders, literally and figuratively, through every state he raced in. He was a symbol of strength and dominance in a nation eager for heroes. His fame had reached a fever pitch, a level that no athlete, human or animal, had achieved before. But here is where the story, for me, turns from exhilarating to profoundly sad, a situation that forces us to look at the man behind the horse and the nature of the pedestal we put our heroes on. At the end of his 3-year-old season, after winning a match race against the top older horse Sir Barton, the decision was made to retire him. Why? Because there were simply no more challenges. No one would run against him. Owners were pulling their horses out of races just to avoid the humiliation of being beaten by 100 lengths. The crowds were paying to see a horse win a race alone. Riddle, a shrewd businessman as well as a horse lover, saw the writing on the wall. The money was now in stud fees. The potential value of Man o' War as a sire was in the millions, a king's ransom that dwarfed the prize money of the day. So that's the situation I was in, reading this history and realizing the tragic irony of his brilliance. The greatest competitor who ever lived was pulled from competition, essentially banished to a life of luxury and endless procreation, because he was too good, too perfect for the game. He was a fire that burned too hot for his own world. Before I tell you what happened next, how his legend took its final immortal form, and how the obsession of his time culminated in that shocking funeral, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have retired him to protect his flawless record and ensure his legacy and wealth? Or would you have kept him racing, even if it meant risking a loss and potentially his life, just for the sheer poetry of watching a genius perform? Let me know your gut reaction. Today on the show, we're diving into the world of economic indicators. These are the numbers that tell us how the economy is doing. Things like GDP, unemployment rates, and consumer confidence. But what do these indicators really mean? How are they calculated? And how should we interpret them? We'll break it all down for you, with the help of some experts, to make sense of the numbers that shape our world. Riddle brought Man o' War back to his stunning Faraway Farm in Lexington, Kentucky, and Big Red's second life as a stud began, and astonishingly his legacy grew even larger. He became the most successful sire of his generation, perhaps of all time. He sired champions like Battleship, the only American horse to ever win the Grand National Steeplechase in England, and War Admiral, who would win the Triple Crown. But the most significant son of all was a horse named Seabiscuit, whose own underdog story would capture the imagination of a later generation. Man o' War became known as the Kentucky Kingmaker, the horse who birthed a dynasty. Now his fans couldn't just see him race. They could visit him at Faraway Farm, and they did. By the hundreds, then the thousands. It became a pilgrimage. Riddle turned it into a spectacle. Man o' War was brought out of his barn every afternoon at 3:30 p.m. for a viewing, and they even charged a fee to see him. Think about that, paying to look at a retired horse. It's insane, but it speaks to the depth of the national hunger for this one animal. People would drive hundreds of miles to stand in his majestic presence, and he was treated like literal royalty. He had his own staff, his own chef, for specialized feeds, of course, and then his own dedicated, fiercely loyal attendant, Will Harbutt, the same man who had handled him as a challenging colt. Will Harbutt is, in my opinion, the second main character in this story. He was the horse's personal human ambassador, and he treated Big Red with a reverence that bordered on religious devotion. For decades, Will would stand by Man o' War's side during the daily showings, spinning the horse's tail for the awestruck crowds. His words were legendary, repeated by every visitor. He would say in his deep, reverent voice, he was the mostest horse. He called him the Emperor of the World. Will's love and devotion solidified Man o' War's image as an immortal legend, a horse of such profound importance that even his keeper spoke of him in biblical terms. This daily ritual continued for over 20 years, cementing the horse's place in the public consciousness, a living, breathing monument to American excellence. He was an American myth, a larger-than-life character in a world desperate for simple, unambiguous greatness. The years passed quietly at Faraway Farm, Man o' War growing older, but his spirit, his presence never diminished. He lived to be 30 years old, an impressive age for a thoroughbred. And then, the inevitable happened. In 1947, Will Harbut, his constant companion, passed away. Man o' War, the horse Will had called the mostest, was visibly distressed. They say that the day Will died, Big Red stopped eating, his proud head drooped, and a sudden inexplicable lameness overtook his front left leg. He mourned for his friend. It was as if the human and the horse were so intertwined that one couldn't truly exist without the other. Only 1 month later, Man o' War passed away. It was a national event, a moment of genuine, profound sorrow for the entire country. The news was front page everywhere. And that's when the final, truly shocking chapter of his story unfolded, his burial. Samuel Riddle, driven by his own deep attachment and the national hysteria surrounding his beloved champion, decreed that the funeral would be one befitting a king. I remember reading the details and feeling a chill. They commissioned a custom-made solid bronze casket, lined with silk, a detail that even today makes my jaw drop. He was placed in a 3-foot-deep grave on Faraway Farm, and the procession was unlike anything a non-human had ever received. The crowds that day were massive, a sea of faces drawn to witness the final act of a legend. Riddle had a eulogy delivered, and the horse was draped in his owner's yellow and black racing silks. As his body was slowly lowered into the ground, a bugler played taps. The sheer spectacle of it, the bronze casket, the bugler, the thousands of weeping spectators, was an undeniable, unbelievable tribute to a horse. It was an act of complete, unadulterated devotion. It cemented the belief that Man o' War wasn't just a horse. He was an idea, a symbol of dominance and perfection that the world would never see again. The cost of the entire service and the initial monument was staggering, but to Riddle and the public, it was the only fitting farewell. The aftermath is the most satisfying part, a true conclusion to a magnificent life. Man o' War was later exhumed and reinterred at the Kentucky Horse Park in 1977, where he now lies beneath a magnificent bronze statue that is easily one of the most visited sights in the park. His grave is marked by that massive statue, a work of art that captures his power and majesty, and it is a shrine. Visitors still come from all over the world, not just racing fans, but people drawn to the story of this singular animal who somehow transcended his species to become a cultural icon. The legacy he left behind in his bloodlines, the sheer statistical dominance of his racing career, and the almost mythical devotion of his fans have made his legend truly immortal. His story isn't about winning races. It's about a perfect being in an imperfect world, and the almost spiritual connection that can exist between humanity and a creature of such astounding power and beauty. The simple, raw emotion of his story is why he remains the undisputed king. I hope that by sharing this with you, I've managed to convey the immense, almost religious power this horse held over an entire nation. His story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never speak a single word. Like this video if you were on Man o' War's side, if you were captivated by the life and legend of Big Red, the horse America buried like a king. Subscribe for more stories like this where I dive into the most dramatic, emotional, and unbelievable true events I can find. And seriously, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Was his funeral a beautiful tribute, or a step too far into obsession? Let me know your final judgment on the king. I'll see you all in the next story.